I think I want to start out and just tell a little bit about myself. When I was a little kid, I had no language, no speech until age 3.5 to 4 years old, and I had very good early educational intervention. I can't emphasize enough the importance of early intervention. And these little kids, they're going to need to have 20 or 30 hours a week. And when I say little kids, I'm talking about little 2-year-olds. You got little 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds, and they're not talking, and they're doing a lot of weird behavior. The worst thing you can do is nothing. I do a lot of talks all over everywhere. Let's say you're in some place and you can only get 1 hour of speech a week. Well, then you better get some volunteers to watch what that teacher does and doing a whole bunch more of it, because I'm a big believer in having professional guidance. But you've got to work with these kids. One of the things that was done with me when I was a child was constant turn-taking games. You gotta teach these kids how to take turns. I'm really bad about that. Now the thing is, in the 50s, things that were fun you had to do with taking turns. Board games, things like that. And those are some of the best ways to teach skills, is board games. Also, just table manners, all the social skills. I'm seeing way too many kids that aren't learning basic things like how to shake hands. I'm appalled at the number of people that come up to me and they don't know how to greet and they don't know how to shake hands. That was taught to me when I was 7. That was taught to all children in the 50s, old-fashioned 50s upbringing. Got to have that one-on-one teaching with the little ones. The thing with the autistic kids, and you get a lot of different diagnoses too, you got to push them. You got to stretch them. You got to stretch them just slightly outside their comfort zone. You can't shove them into something totally new. You can't take a kid that's got a lot of sensory problems and shove him into Walmart, and he's got sensory overload. That's not going to work. That is absolutely not going to work. And when I was 15, I had a chance to go out to my aunt's ranch, and I was scared to go. And Mother wasn't going to let me not go. I was going to go for a week, and if I hated it, I could come back. I ended up loving it. I've talked to other parents where their kid was scared to go to sleepaway camp. Once he got into sleepaway camp, he really liked it. We've got to get him out doing things. It's really important. You've got to stretch them. Mother had a really good sense of just how hard to stretch me. Now, sensory issues can be very variable, and you can get all kinds of bad sensory sensitivity problems along with a lot of different diagnostic labels. And the problem is diagnostic labels aren't very precise. They aren't precise like a tuberculosis diagnosis. In fact, the DSM-5, the psychiatric associations decided to take out Asperger's and call it social communication disorder. Well, it's still the same thing. I think funding has something to do with that. Nobody sits around the conference table and decides to change the diagnosis of tuberculosis or call it something else. You got tuberculosis? You got tuberculosis. It's just that simple. But you can get sensory problems with many different labels. And sensory problems are one of the things that need to be researched. And they need to be researched based on the specific sensory problem you have. It might be hearing sensitivity, visual problems. It might be touch sensitivity. Well, and I have problems with oppositional defiant being a medical disorder. I'm just too much of a hardcore scientist. In the 50s, those were juvenile delinquents. And, a lot of those kids, they're just bored stiff. And if they learned a few work skills and got into things that interested them, then they wouldn't be conduct disorder and oppositional defiant. Now, when I was a little kid, loud noises like the school bell hurt my ears. I hated balloons, because you never know when they're going to pop. Some autistic kids are just fabulous with animals. They just know how to work with animals, but there's others that don't like the dog, because you never know when it might bark. You see, the fear that you might get blasted by something sensory can be a problem. Now, sounds are better tolerated if the kid initiates the sound. So let's deal with balloons popping. Maybe we blow one up only this big and I pop it, makes no noise at all. A little bigger, pop it. I'm controlling the sound. Other bad sounds are the dreaded buzzer on the scoreboard. We'll maybe go down to the gym when it's not busy and hit some earplugs on and we press the buzzer on the scoreboard. He initiates it and then gradually take the earplugs off. It's okay to wear earplugs or noise-canceling headset in the cafeteria, but you better not have it on all day. As you wear it all day, it's going to make that hearing more sensitive. Now, when I was little, they thought maybe I was deaf, so I got a hearing test to make sure I wasn't deaf. Auditory threshold may be normal, but that tells you absolutely nothing about auditory detail. That is the ability to hear the hard consonant sounds. Like if I say cat, rat, or bat, I can't tell the difference I have to figure it out by context. Okay, if we were talking about, something that was in the sewer, that's probably going to be rats, not baseball bats or the bats that fly. I've figured that out by context. So teachers need to slow down, enunciate the hard consonant sounds. These kids have a brain that processes more slowly. This is kind of a principle that goes across all developmental disorders. Slow down, slow down. And some people have problems where their hearing fades in and out, like a bad mobile phone. Sort of like going up and down the hills, mobile phone is fading in and out. Another problem in a lot of developmental problems is attention-shifting slowness. Like, I don't mind flash pictures back at the book table, that's fine. But if you do it when I'm doing my talk, it attracts my attention, and then I lose my train of thought. Because I got to be paying attention to my thoughts, and it takes me much longer to shift back from that cell phone ringing or that flash than most people. And sometimes you got to give a kid time to respond. I can remember when I was in kindergarten, and we had this little exercise where I had to mark all the pictures that began with the letter B, like B as in Bravo or bicycle. Well, I marked the suitcase as a bag, because that's what we called them in our house. And the teacher wouldn't give me time to explain that those were bags in our house. And I really did understand the letter B. Now, this shows very clearly attention-shifting slowness. Okay, what was done here is people are watching a movie, tracking the eye movement. And look at how many times a normal person looks back and forth. Now, this paper was originally just about social stuff, and that normal people look at the eyes. I didn't even know that people had all the secret eye signals until I read about them in a book when I was 50 years old. That's when I learned about that. But a lot of people don't seem to take the sensory problems seriously enough. To me, one of the top areas for autism research would be on sensory. Because how can you be social if you can't tolerate the environment where people do social things, like a football game, sports bar, or something like that, all these TVs going on at once, sensory overload. And look how the autistic didn't shift attention at all. And they're looking at the mouth because they don't hear very well. Now, another kind of sensory problem, and this is not a sensory problem that I have, is pixelation of the visual image. Where, when the satellite dish is shaken, how the image can kind of break up, and it's raining and it's shaking up your satellite dish. Well, you can get a similar thing like that happens back here in the visual system, back where the auditory, where the visual files are assembled. Because in the back of the brain, you got shape, color, and motion, and texture circuits. Those have to work together. And you know what? Scientists don't know how they work. They know where they're located, because when you have strokes, it breaks them in really weird ways. But they don't know how they merge the image. Something's wrong with this. You can get this problem with a head injury. A lot of the sensory problems in a head injury are the same as the developmental disorder. See, because what happens in a head injury, you rip circuits. Developmental disorder, they just don't grow right. Okay, what are signs that there's something wrong back here in the back of the brain? Well, they do a lot of flicking. They'll often look out the corner of their eye because they can see better out the corner of their eye. They may be terrified of escalators because they can't tell how to get on and off. They may hate fluorescent lights. That's your biggie. 60-second fluorescent lights just drive them absolutely crazy. Maybe you have difficulty catching a ball. I am finding in my livestock handling class, where students have to do a drawing, I'm finding 1 out of 50 has this problem. These kids cannot draw. You ask them to draw a circle, instead of going like this, they're drawing like scribbles all over everywhere. They just can't see it. Also, ask them if they ever see the print jiggle on the page. You're going to have a hard time reading if the print's jiggling on the page. Now, this can vary from eye strain, where you'll probably do okay in school, to absolutely not being able to read. And let's look at some of the simple things you can do to help this. If you've got fluorescent lights in your room, get that kid's desk over by the window. If you don't have a window, then get an incandescent light bulb. Some people like 100 watt, others like a lower watt to blot out the fluorescent lights. Maybe wear a hat. And the only computers that do not flicker are tablets and laptops. You need to use tablets and laptops. Okay, phones probably, that's going to be okay too. The worst computers are the TV type and the older type flat panels. They all flicker. And I had a dyslexic student, and if she hadn't had her laptop, she would have flunked out of school without, because she couldn't see on a TV computer. Another thing is play with the colored background on the computer, like maybe light blue, tan, gray. play around with printing the homework on different pale pastel papers. See, the problem that we've got in autism is this may only help 10%. That's the problem. It may only help 10%. But that 10% that it really helps. Also, play around with colored lenses, like the Irwin colored lenses, and if that's too pricey, then play around with some pink sunglasses from Walmart. You know, some designer lenses. Try the pale lavenders, the pale pinks, the pale tans. Got to be pale, because you're going to have to read with these. Wouldn't it be stupid to flunk out of school because you didn't try this? You know, people talk about evidence-based medicine here, but I'm talking about trying something, even if it only had a 1 in 100 chance of working. You can figure this out like in one afternoon, playing around with colored paper down at the Kinko's FedEx print shop, or trying on some colored glasses at the local Walmart. Okay, now when you have very, very bad sensory problems, especially in people that remain nonverbal, they can't shut out background stimulus. The systems in the brain that screen out stimulation don't work. And then when they get meltdown and sensory overload, it just all floods in. And some people need frequent breaks to prevent sensory overload. Some are mono-channel. They are not able to see and hear at the same time. They've either got to do one or the other. And people with very severe visual problems, they're going to be an auditory thinker. I work better reading stuff and seeing things with my eyes, but there's others that work a whole lot better with their ears. Now, if you're working with older, nonverbal children and adults, these would be two books I think are required reading, because they're written by people, adults on the spectrum, that type independently, and they look very, very low functioning. Can't control a lot of their movements. They talk about sensory scrambling. They talk about sensory information just flooding in. They are, how can I talk if my lips don't move? And Carly's voice. And there's some nonverbals who can learn to type on the iPad. And the reason why the virtual keyboard works is because when you press the button on the virtual keyboard, the print appears right beside it. Where on a laptop, the print appears up here, and you've got to go like this. You can't look at the screen and the print at the same time. So they can't do this. 30 years ago, a teacher took a box and put it in front of a computer monitor, put the keyboard up there, so the print appeared next to the keyboard. That also worked on just a big, clunky, big computer. Okay, scientists have learned a lot about the brain. You want to look at some of the research? You can go on the PubMed database, PubMed database. And where you've got the abnormalities is the circuits that connect the different parts of the brain together. Kind of imagine the brain as an office building, and you've got all these interdepartmental communications. That's where the developmental abnormalities are. You see, when you hear a word, you see a word, think about words, or hear or see them, different parts of the brain turn on. And you've got to have inter-office communication. And this is where there's been some real breakthroughs in brain scanning. Now, this is a diagram of the major freeways that connect up different departments in the brain. You see, in your brain, the outer part, the wrinkly part, that's the gray matter that you think with. Then the white stuff that's all in the middle of your brain, that's all interconnector cables. That is 3/4 of your brain. And that's where a lot of developmental abnormalities are. Now, kind of imagine this as a map of the United States. And on the East Coast, you know, Washington, D.C. and New York. In the middle there, you got Chicago. That's the emotion center. And then out in the West Coast, you got Silicon Valley. And what tends to happen on the East Coast is we get a lot of local commuter trains, like going between New York and Boston and things like that. But we're missing a lot of long-distance circuits that maybe go out to Chicago. And Chicago's where the emotion center is. And what you lose is top-down control on emotion. That's why you get these emotional outbursts, because the top-down control isn't there. Silicon Valley, that may get some extra geek stuff. Now, there's my brain there. There's a big space there between the skull and the brain. Well, that's where the gray matter goes. And this is the connectome. And this is done with a new scanner that was paid for by the Defense Department for head injuries in veterans. And what that is, that's inter-office communications that connect up to all the gray matter that goes in this space that's outside the connectome. And the thing that's so cool about this is they can actually dissect out the circuits, because these are big freeways that go all the way across the brain, and see which circuits have a problem. Now, the Defense Department's providing the scanner, but they're not going to provide autism research. But you know, scientists just love to mess around with new equipment. It's sort of like when you get the new telescope or when the microscope was invented, you got to go look at everything. And you find out there's little wiggly things in the water you're drinking. You find out all kinds of gross things with a new microscope. Well, this scanner now is at the point where scientists like to get to play around with it. Well, I got to play around on this state-of-the-art scanner. There's my connectome without the skull. Okay, now what that is there is it's a speech output circuit. It's speak what I see. So if I see a dog, then I got to speak. I had problems with getting my speech out. And in this scanner, you can dissect out the circuits. You can't do that with the older technology, because the older technology can't tell if freeways cross or they have an intersection. This new scanner can figure that out. Boy, it's a lot of computing. And who do you think put all that computing in a little tiny box that you can actually pick up? It would be somebody with Asperger's. They're the ones that build that kind of stuff. Now there's my speak what I see circuit. And what we did in this is they found a 65-year-old artist, PhD art professor, to be the control, because you always have to compare it against something else. Compare me against her. This is scientists messing around with the scanner. But this is how you start to find out. And what happened is this explains why I had problems with getting my speech out. I wasn't one of these echolalic kids that yaks out all these TV commercials, all these movie scripts, but they don't understand what they mean. Echolalic kids, speech output's working fine. I couldn't get speech out. You see, and eventually we're going to be able to diagnose very precisely right where there is a problem. So, okay, now we look at bandwidth. And so how many fibers did I have for speech output? And you can see here that I've got much lower bandwidth, because as the circuit grew forward, instead of growing where it should go, I mean, like they had all these branches that went off into like crazy places like the motor cortex. Got speech circuits in the motor cortex. I don't think they do too much good there. And you know, you look at these scans and boy, it's just kind of a mind blower. Okay, auditory. This is speak what I hear. Look at the little tiny shrimpy thing that I've got compared to the normal person, compared to the art professor. You know, that was my control. And I much prefer to learn with what I see than what I hear. Now, one thing that's been interesting about all this scanning, okay, everyone's going to run out and want to go to these scanners, is everything that's shown up on the scanner showed up clinically. I had problems with getting the speech out. I'm going to show you some other scanning results where I had a lot of anxiety. They found out my fear center was big. They found out that my cerebellum was 20% smaller than normal. So that would explain balance. Now, there's evidence that language covers up things like visual thinking, because you can get some Alzheimer's where it wrecks the frontal cortex, wrecks language, and maybe art talent comes out. I read about a guy who got hit on the head in a bar fight, and it made him a math savant. It smashed out my kind of visual thinking, and now the guy's like a math genius after getting hit on the head during a bar fight. It's just not, what it shows is that there's a lot of other things in the brain that are kind of covered up by all the social stuff. You know, when you think about it, who do you think made the first stone spear? It wasn't the social yaks around the campfire, that's for sure. Now here's a picture that a little kid did in perspective. Most little kids don't draw in perspective. I can't emphasize enough, develop strengths. By the time I got in 3rd or 4th grade, it was very obvious that I had good abilities in art. My ability in art was always encouraged. Now I've seen kids where all they do is anime. Well, they need to do some other things. When I was in 3rd or 4th grade, all I wanted to draw was horse heads. And I was encouraged to draw some other things. You don't just draw horse heads. You know, broaden it out, expand it. Mother took a picture that I did of a beach and put it in a professional frame. She was always encouraging me to broaden the skill out. If the kid likes trains, let's do math with trains. Let's do reading with trains. Let's work that special interest into things. There's a nice little book out now called Asper Kids. It has a lot of things about using the special interest. It's a total mistake to try to stomp it out. I've heard sad stories where they want to stomp out art. That's totally terrible. You want to build up on that art ability, because what I did with the cattle used my art ability. It's basically what I do is industrial design. Now, I'm a total visual thinker. I got pictures in my head, like movies in my head. And I used to think everybody had movies in the head. I didn't know my thinking was different. I didn't really know until I was, in my mid-40s, the extent of how my thinking was different. I'm very interested in how there's different kinds of minds. People are not all the same. Well, as a visual thinker, that really helped me design cattle facilities because I could visualize them in my mind. And you might wonder why curved, because as the cattle come on around the bend, they think they're going back to where they come from. That's using a natural cattle behavior. I noticed they were scared of things like shadows, scared of things like reflections. I'm always getting asked, are they scared of getting slaughtered? No, they're more scared of reflections. And there's an aerial view of one of my facilities. Incidentally, if you want to see a video of some of my equipment, you can go on YouTube, type in Temple Grandin cattle. I've got a tour of a meat packing plant. You can type in Temple Grandin beef packing plant video tour if you want to see that. I will not be showing that tonight, but Temple Grandin beef packing plant tour. And the movie recreated all my jobs accurately. I love the fact that it recreated all my projects because I'm a geek and I'm all about all my projects. I'm getting a little worried today when I see really smart Asperger kids, or maybe next year there'll be social communication kids, but it's the same thing. And instead of getting fixated on trains, or maybe anime or something like that, they're getting fixated on their autism. Autism's a very important part of who I am, but I'm a college professor first. And the things I do as a college professor are important. Like I have academic books on livestock I'm writing. They might only sell 1,000 copies. Those books are still very important to me because they're my profession. Yes, and all the books that are out there on the book table are important too, but my profession is my real identity as to who I am. So livestock handling and transport, it's probably sold about 2,500 copies. It's still a really important book because it's my profession. I don't think it's good for a kid to get so hung up on autism where that becomes their main fixation. Because when they grow up, they got to work. I would never want to snap my fingers and not be autistic because I like the logical way I think. But really, when you get right down to it, I am my profession. I have kids that come to me, they really want to go on the speaking circuit. Well, I worked on a lot of cattle stuff before I went on any speaking circuit. In fact, half the cattle in this country are handled in a center track restrainer system I designed. That's pretty good for somebody you thought was mentally retarded. Now, unfortunately, we've got probably the world's worst projector here. It's a gorgeous theater, but it's really a horrible projector, and it's not showing my drawings off very well. This is really bad. And, people thought I was really, really super weird, and they didn't want to talk to me. But when I whipped out my drawings, and you better have them on something better than this, people would go, wow, you did that? I had to learn how to sell my work rather than myself. So if a kid's good at art, let's get some of the art on his phone. So you're there to have your portfolio. You never know who you might want to be showing your work to. And that one's pretty terrible too. Okay. Now, I have all these very specific pictures in my mind. So how do I form a concept? I form a concept by taking specific examples of something like a cat or a dog and putting them in file folders. Every concept is learned with specific examples. That's what's called bottom-up thinking, where most people are top-down. I got to get you to think in the opposite direction. I realized my thinking was really different when I asked people about church steeples. And I was shocked to find out that most people saw this vague, generalized thing. I only see specific ones, and they come up like Googled pictures, like childhood one, Fort Collins, where I live, local ones, famous ones, other famous ones, more famous ones. You see, my concept of what a steeple is made of specific examples. This is why we need to get kids out doing things. Think of their mind as kind of a big internet, and you got to fill it up with web pages. Because to understand something in the future, I have to compare it back to the past. So the more data I can load into my head, the better I'm going to think. Now, I used to joke around that I had a huge internet connection going deep into my visual cortex. Turns out I do. And I got these scans, I'm like going, wow. And I got a really big one right up here. Now, you see that big bush up there? Looking at the news scan, there was some evidence that shunt circuits formed where that bush is. You see, that's where the white matter cables join the gray matter. And so if you don't have some of these big cables running across, you may build a side street to another cable, because I don't think you can grow those big, long cables. They're going that far across the brain. And when you dissect a formalin-fixed brain, they appear as tiny white threads. I don't think you can grow the whole length of the brain. So you're working on side streets. And let me tell you, the stuff they're learning on concussions and football players, it ain't pretty. It looks like freeways after the earthquake. It looks like spaghetti bundles you twisted and ripped a big part of it. Now, this is a more conventional scan, and that blue thing, that's the water that's like in your ventricles. It's full of cerebrospinal fluid. Mine are really asymmetric, and it trashed part of my parietal cortex, so that's why I can't multitask. I got terrible working memory, and I can't do algebra. I got no working memory. But I got really good thinking for visual thinking. You see, you need different kinds of minds to work on stuff, because I'm a visual thinker. When I found out why the Fukushima nuclear power plant blew up, I couldn't believe it. A visual thinker wouldn't make this mistake. It's not too smart when you live next to the sea to put your emergency generators that are really important for your emergency cooling pumps in a basement that's not waterproof. And any farmer here in Illinois, in Indiana, can tell you that diesels don't run underwater. It's just that simple, and that's why they burned up. Now, here's a really important slide, because in questioning a lot of people on the autism spectrum, and just questioning a lot of people in general, I kind of figured out there's three kinds of thinking types. There's the photorealistic visual thinker like me, who thinks totally in pictures, can't do algebra. Some of these kids need to jump to geometry and trig. There seems to be one kind of math mind that's good at algebra and they're terrible at geometry. Another kind is really good at geometry and trig. And one of the mistakes made with me is we didn't jump to geometry. Gigantic mistake. And geometry is, people think, well, we got to have algebra, prerequisite for geometry. That's a pile of rubbish. Geometry was invented first. It was invented first. How could algebra be the prerequisite? Another kind of mind is the mathematician mind, more of a pattern thinker. And there's research now, and I've got a new book coming out, it's going to be called The Autistic Brain. New research on that these photorealistic visual thinking, like what I have, and the pattern thinker, two different kinds of brain circuits. There's actually been research on this. Sometimes in the middle of the night when I'm surfing on the internet, I clicked on a cited by and I found a great paper. And the kids that are the pattern thinkers, they're often bad at reading. So you might have a little third grader, a little genius in math, but he's going to need special ed in reading. And don't make that smart math kid do baby math, because then he's going to turn into oppositional defiant on you. He needs high school math, then he needs to do the high school math book and bring the high school math book back to the fifth grade classroom. Then you got the verbal facts guy. This is the guy that knows all about history and things like that. They're into words. And then you've got the auditory thinker. It works better through their ears. You can get people that are mixtures of these different kinds of thinking. But everybody's not the same. Okay, I can't design a nuclear reactor. I'm going to have to be a mathematician for that. But maybe I better do the safety systems. Steve Jobs, who was probably on the spectrum, so was Einstein, no speech until age 3, was an artist. You can look up his patents on Google Patents. They were all design patents. And the engineers have to make the insides work. The two have got to work together. Just to say there's different ways to do algebra. You can do it the verbal way, or you can do it the visual spatial way. There's two ways of thinking here. Now, I want to give you a glimpse into something that's not my mind, into the mathematician pattern mind. This praying mantis is made out of a single sheet of folded paper. No tape, no cutting. And what you see in the background is the folding pattern. And I look at that and I go, wow, you turned that into a praying mantis? You've got to be kidding. Now, one of the things that really helped me was all the hands-on classes. Cooking, sewing, woodworking, metal shop, art. I just heard in Illinois they've taken all that stuff out. I understand here in Indiana you still have it. You need to fight to keep that stuff. Because the thing about those kind of classes, you can work all your academics into that. Cooking is a great place to teach proportions and fractions. Don't be taking these things out. You can get a lot of free stuff from Montessori online for teaching math. There's all kinds of free educational stuff online now. A lot of garbage online, but there's an awful lot of good stuff online too. And if I hadn't had all the hands-on things I was doing, I would have gone nowhere. And they teach resourcefulness. They teach how do you figure out problems. I think we're losing some of that resourcefulness. So how do I understand something abstract like the Lord's Prayer? I didn't understand it. The only thing I understood was the power and the glory. You got a rainbow, and at the bottom of the rainbow, you've got an electric tower. That's the power and the glory. Now, this is another important concept with many different developmental problems. All my thinking uses specific examples. Everything is learned by specific example. Every concept is by specific example. I probably need to see 4 or 5 dogs before I get an idea of what a dog is. How can a Great Dane and a Dachshund both be a dog? Well, they both bark. They've got some common features. Cats, maybe you see 5 or 6 different kinds of cats. Then I'll understand they go in the cat category, the dogs go in the dog category. It's bottom-up thinking, not top-down. You learn by specific example. How do you learn something like, what is polite behavior? You learn it by specific example. Okay, spitting in church, that certainly wouldn't be very polite. Nope, we don't do that in church. Pointing at a fat lady and laughing, that's not very polite. See, again, those are specific examples. And use your teachable moments when you're out there in the field. Do games with categories. You got to teach flexibility of thinking. An object could be both yellow and rectangular. You see, an object can be in more than one category. Play games like 20 questions. That's a good thing to teach that flexibility. And this is a test that shows whether you're into the details or into the whole. And the autistic mind picks out the little letters a whole lot quicker than identifying the big letters. Now, some people think autistic learning is just memorization and scripting. And when I was in high school, I got teased and teased and teased and teased. And the only places I was not teased was horseback riding, model rocket club, and electronics lab. The students that were interested in all those specialized things were not into teasing. It's important to have those specialized activities. And then when I went in the parking lot, they called me tape recorder. Okay, why was I tape recorder? Because I always used the same phrases. But you see, as you learn more and you get out and you do more things, then I got more information in the web pages inside my mind, and then I can have other things to choose from, and it's not going to be so much like a tape recorder. I didn't even think my thinking got good until I was 40. I had to load a lot of information. It's sort of like I didn't turn into grown-up really until I was 40. So I had enough knowledge. We got to get them out there doing stuff. Let's teach numbers. They got to learn numbers apply to lots of different things. Pencils, 2 people, 2 cars, 2 thumbtacks, 2 insects, lots of different things. Teach adding and subtracting. I have 5 pieces of candy and eat 2, I got 3 left. Let's do a lot of stuff with cooking. That's a great place. Teach a lot of mathematical things, proportionality, fractions. You cut up the pizza. Just as you do stuff, use it to teach proportionality. So we cut a pizza up into 4 pieces, and then we weigh them. They're going to weigh approximately the same. That's kind of hands-on learning for math. Okay, position words. We got to teach them with a lot of specific examples. The plane goes down and lands. You walk down the stairs. I put a cup down. I walk down the hill. You got to teach that with several different examples. You need to do that with all the position words. Because if I just talked about going down the stairs, I think down only applied to stairs. Toy airplanes are great. They can go over something. They can land on something. They can fly beside something. They can fly under something. Demonstrate those position words.